The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. This week, Matt Rozsa on why Democrats should take a stand on legalizing marijuana. Author David Cay Johnston on why a year of President Trump is worse than we think. And Bill Press talks with Democratic Strategist Karen Finney on grassroots activists, women candidates, and the possibility of a midterm blue wave. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight, and follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Jeff Sessions' plan for a federal crackdown on states that legalize marijuana may be seen as an unwelcome escalation in the war on drugs. Journalist Matthew Rozsa sees something else, a moment of opportunity for Democrats. And we say hello to Matthew Rozsa, breaking news writer for Salon. He holds an M.A. in history from Rutgers University, Newark, is completing a Ph.D. program in history at Lehigh University, and his work has appeared in Mike, Quartz, and MSNBC. Matthew Rozsa, thank you very much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
It's a pleasure being here.
And our pleasure to have you with us. As the new year began, the movement for legalizing marijuana seemed to be perched on a major advance with the advent of legal weed in California. Within a week, all that changed. Remind us what happened.
I'm looking at a CNN article about the Cole memo that was passed by Deputy Attorney General Jim Cole under President Barack Obama. I should say implemented, not passed, in which he directed federal prosecutors to essentially adopt a policy of non-interference with states that had passed marijuana-friendly laws. His argument was that as long as those states didn't allow marijuana to interfere with other federal priorities, such as preventing drugs from getting into the hands of minors or helping gangs, that the government should keep its hands off the issue. And Sessions, who infamously declared during his confirmation hearing that good people don't smoke marijuana, although apparently in his case that doesn't extend to, good people making sure that racial minorities aren't denied their voting rights. But that matter aside, Jeff Sessions is very passionate about this issue and obviously is now taking steps to clamp down on marijuana use.
Right after the Sessions announcement, you of course, wrote an op-ed in Salon with this title, Democrats Must Seize on Jeff Sessions' Misguided Marijuana Policy. Why should this be an issue for Democrats?
Well, unfortunately, although there have been Republicans who have supported various forms of marijuana legalization from medical use to recreational, so I don't want to completely slam the other party in an unfair way, but it is an issue where Democrats seem to more logically gravitate toward it. And historically, as I point out in my article, these kinds of issues work well with Democrats. I mean, the most obvious example would be prohibition, when Democrats like Al Smith, the New York governor who was the candidate in 1928 for president, and then eventually Franklin Roosevelt, also a New York governor, who was elected in 1932 and eventually repealed prohibition during his first term, they used this issue because they realized that there's a certain degree to which, A, it is inherently discriminatory. In the case of prohibition, it was often used by conservatives to stop ethnic white groups that used alcohol for cultural or even religious reasons. In the case of marijuana, the history of marijuana prohibition is very much connected to racial oppression against African Americans. And in addition to realizing that there is an injustice here in terms of race and ethnic issues, there's also just the general injustice of telling people what they can or can't put into their bodies. I mean, you can make a case for that with extreme drugs like opioids, but for something like marijuana, which frankly is less dangerous than alcohol, the argument that it should be, that you should have your life potentially ruined simply because you want to smoke it, doesn't hold up. And so for those practical, political, and moral reasons, it's a logical fit.
Mm-hmm. You know, you mentioned opioids, and there are a lot of people that point to how marijuana could actually help relieve some of the opioid crisis that we have right now. So, you know, then there's also that. Several Democrats have already stepped out to take a lead on this issue. Who are they and what are they doing?
Well, I think the most prominent name is Senator Cory Booker, and I give him a lot of credit. Last year, he introduced legislation that would legalize marijuana, expunge federal marijuana convictions, and penalize states that have racially disparate arrest or incarceration rates for individuals whose crimes are related to marijuana. Other senators like Kirsten Gillibrand have also joined the marijuana justice movement. Elizabeth Warren is another one who comes to mind. But, I mean, Booker really has sort of made this a core issue. And I think politically that's very smart of him. And I think it's something that if he chooses to make that a centerpiece of his presidential campaign platform, if and when he runs in 2020, it could wind up yielding great benefits for him.
You know, even with this kind of leadership, there are still some gaps in Democratic Party support for legal weed. Why?
I mean, it's hard to get over those stigmas. You know, with prohibition, although there had been a temperance movement in existence in this country for decades and decades and decades, it was only illegal for about a decade and a half before prohibition was repealed. With marijuana, it's been illegal for, by now, we're coming on about 80 years. And I think people have just become so accustomed to the concept of marijuana being illegal that it's much harder to dislodge a lot of the stigma that exists surrounding the drug.
We're speaking with Matthew Rozsa, breaking news writer for Salon, holds an MA in history from Rutgers University, Newark, and is completing a PhD program in history at Lehigh University. His work, of course, has appeared on Mike, Quartz, and MSNBC. Kansas State Representative Steve Alford made a despicable statement about marijuana and why he opposes legalization. Basically, he said that black people are more likely to abuse drugs because of character makeup and genetics. Now, there's a long history of racism in the way lawmakers have approached marijuana. Talk to us about that, if you would.
That quote reminds me of something that John Ehrlichman, who was a top aide to President Richard Nixon, who really doubled down on the war on drugs and specifically marijuana, said back in the 90s about the way that the Nixon White House approached this issue. And I'm going to read it because I think it says a great deal. Ehrlichman said, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." That was in the 90s, and that really speaks volumes. I mean, Harry Anslinger, who convinced Congress to pass the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, was very explicit about the fact that he believed marijuana, he complained that it was responsible for the, quote, satanic music of African Americans, and it was responsible for jazz and swing, and it caused white women to want to engage in miscegenation and all other horribly racist opinions. And this is like the racist element is inextricably linked to marijuana prohibition, much as, incidentally, various forms of bigotry were linked to prohibition in the early 20th century.
How about that? Well, I'll tell you what, if it's responsible for jazz and swing, then legalize it. As Jeff Sessions reasserts federal enforcement over marijuana laws, one of the interesting angles is the reversal of the traditional GOP position on states' rights. It suggests a less than sincere commitment to federalism in this administration. Do you see it that way?
Absolutely, I do. Listen, the Republican philosophy about states' rights really is only something that they trot out when it's politically expedient. They like to say we're the party of states' rights, but really they're the party of social conservatism, at least when it comes to this issue. And even though Jeff Sessions may talk till the cows come home about how he believes in federalism and local governance, and Donald Trump, by the way, has said many similar things, at the end of the day, they seem it's pretty clear by the fact that he rescinded the Cole memo, which was grounded in the rhetoric of states' rights, that he only respects states' rights when states don't do things that disagree with the moral opinions of Jeff Sessions. And that's what it comes down to. This is a situation in which a handful of conservatives throughout the country, I shouldn't say a handful, but certainly a minority of conservatives throughout the country, very strongly disapprove of marijuana use for moral reasons, i.e. Jeff Sessions saying good people don't smoke marijuana, and are willing to impose their moral views on the rest of the nation. And states' rights be damned.
And, you know, we've heard the president say directly, it should be up to states. It should be up to states. I mean, this contradicts Jeff Sessions.
It absolutely contradicts Jeff Sessions. I mean, Donald Trump, what can I say, is not a man known for his ideological consistency.
Well, that might be the understatement of the afternoon. Matthew Rozsa, breaking news writer for Salon, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Matthew, thank you for your time with us. We appreciate it and look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate joining you.
You're quite welcome. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America. Whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Author David Cay Johnston says Donald Trump's tweets are getting in the way of a much more important story. So he wrote a book. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Governors and mayors insist that giving our tax dollars to corporations to lure them to move to our cities is good public policy because the corporations create jobs, those workers pay taxes, and voila, the corporate giveaway pays for itself. Really? No. Good Jobs First tracked the 386 incentive deals since 1976 that gave at least $50 million to a corporation. Then it tallied the number of jobs created. The average cost per job was $658,000 each. That's far more than cities and states can recover through sales, property, income, and all other taxes those job holders would pay in their lifetimes. The rosy job creation claims by deal makers also tend to be bogus, for they don't subtract the number of jobs lost as a result of these deals. Amazon, for example, has leaned on officials in every major metro area to subsidize its creation of a nationwide network of warehouses, data centers, and other facilities. In a 2016 report titled Amazon's Stranglehold, The Institute for Local Self-Reliance found that more than half of Amazon's facilities had been built with government subsidies. And Good Jobs First found that since 2005, Amazon has received more than $1 billion from taxpayers to build their private business. Each handout was made in the name of local workers. And yes, Amazon does employ thousands. But the subsidies enable the retail giant to undercut local unsubsidized competitors, driving them out of business and causing devastating job losses that greatly outnumber jobs gained. Indeed, while Amazon employs 146,000 people, it has eliminated some 295,000 jobs. This is Jim Hightower saying, check it out at ilsr.org/Amazon-stranglehold.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. David Cay Johnston is an award-winning journalist who once revealed President Trump's, quote, true net worth, close quote. Now, he's revealing the president's true impact on American lives. And we say hello to David Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who has been covering Donald Trump for almost 3 decades. He's the author of numerous books, including The Making of Donald J. Trump, and his newest book is titled, It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America. David Cay Johnston, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Glad to be here.
And nice to have you with us as well. The title of your book suggests that despite all the coverage of Donald Trump, much of it negative, the American public is still missing something. Is that really what you believe?
Absolutely. Much of the coverage has been focused on Donald's tweets and the erratic behavior that I predicted he would engage in, and not about the substance of what he's doing to you. Donald Trump's actions and those of the people that are in the administration because of him are putting your job in jeopardy, your safety in jeopardy, your health, and are doing serious long-term damage to the ability of the United States of America to both create a vibrant economy and to prosecute polluters, people who put workers' lives in jeopardy needlessly, and other bad behavior.
Now, among other things, your book examines Trump's attack on the administrative state. What do you want readers to understand about the administrative state and its role in American democracy?
Well, the reason we have rules and regulations is not for the saints. It's for people who misbehave. Employers who put workers' lives in danger needlessly, for example. The Trump administration stopped putting up announcements about companies where workers had died on the job, and about 4,800 workers a year die on the job. They haven't posted since last August any information on fatalities at work. They canceled a rule that the Obama administration was putting in place dealing with sleep apnea. We've had a series of horrific train and truck accidents and bus driver accidents where the operator fell asleep because they have sleep apnea, something I suffer from, but that is 100% treatable. And under the guise of we have too much regulation, they said we're not going to test these drivers. Well, they just put your life in jeopardy every time you go down the highway because there are truck drivers, bus drivers, and train operators who have sleep apnea, who haven't been diagnosed, and who are not in control of when they suddenly fall asleep and cause fatal accidents. That's just a sampling of the kinds of things I show are going on because I focused on what is the Trump team doing to our government.
Well, they seem to make a lot of these decisions kind of on false information, like it's going to save us money here or there. But, what you're talking about, a tragedy like that, I mean, it's beyond cost in terms of financial loss. I mean, so it makes no sense on any level.
Well, it makes sense only to the extent that if you're a large, say, trucking company and you buy insurance, it may be cheaper for you to just pay people off. And remember the Ford Pinto back in 1971, if you're old enough, where they saved $1 in the construction of Ford Pintos and put the people at risk that the car would explode in a rear-end accident. Mm-hmm. And here, the cost-benefit analyses make no sense. And Trump is doing all sorts of things that are inimical to the interests of workers that I go through and show and explain to you what they mean, even though he said in his inaugural address that every single decision will be made to put America first and put working people and the forgotten man first. And, of course, Trump immediately forgot the forgotten man and instead of draining the swamp, turned Washington, D.C. into a paradise for Goldman Sachs and its clients.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with David Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, author of numerous books, and his latest is It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America. David, the environment could be one of the biggest casualties of the Trump administration. How much damage has been done so far, and how much of this is reversible once he is out of office?
Well, they've undertaken to collect from people who work in the EPA everything they can find out about the weaknesses or vulnerabilities in enforcement of pollution laws. And presumably they turned all this over to the Chamber of Commerce and its clients. There are indications they've removed data. Well, we have spent a fortune in this country over the last 40 years collecting detailed information on the sources and the points where pollution occur. If you remove that information or disrupt it, you probably cannot use it in a court case, certainly not in a criminal court case. So while some of the damage is going to be fixable by a future administration, a lot of it is permanent damage that will result in some people developing diseases like asthma and heart disease, in dying early from cancer and other illnesses. And we should be deeply concerned about that. You know, we didn't adopt the environmental regulations we have, and I'm not arguing they're perfect, but we didn't adopt any of them without public input and discussion about why do we need these particular rules.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the book, you also write about the campaign promise that seems to never fade from sight, the wall. What are we missing on that story?
Well, the first thing we're missing, of course, is that Mexico's never going to pay for the wall, and Donald knew that from day one. That his proposal that we pay for it with a tariff shows that, well, Donald has an economics degree from Penn. He didn't earn it. They gave it to him. Because, of course, a tariff on goods brought in from Mexico is a cost borne not by Mexicans, but by American consumers. And Donald keeps pushing the wall because it stirs up his base. And who is his base? Well, they're like him. They're racists, and many of them are ignorant. And the wall is a signal to the racists, the fine people he talked about after Charlottesville, that he is one with them.
You know, you're one of our nation's most knowledgeable sources on Donald Trump's finances, and we've talked about it before. How has that picture come into focus a year into this presidency?
Well, first of all, Donald, during the campaign claimed he was worth as much as $11 billion. He consistently said more than 10. He then asked permission to file his presidential financial disclosure statement without signing it and was told, no, you have to sign this under penalty of perjury. Well, he listed his wealth as $1.4 billion, not 10. And even if you take all the items that are just $50 million and above and double them, you don't even get close to $2 billion. Donald Trump is a con artist and a fraud, and I don't believe he's got $1.4 billion. Values he places on some of his properties make no sense. His Scottish and Irish golf courses lose money hand over fist. How can they be worth the kinds of money that he claims that they're worth? And so a year in here, we find that Donald Trump is violating the Domestic Emoluments Clause. There are 3 references to emoluments in the Constitution. And the Domestic Clause is that a president may not receive any compensation from the United States or any of them, which means any of the individual states. And yet, Secret Service agents are renting golf carts at full price at Trump properties where he spends a third of his time. American officials are having taxpayer paid for lunches at the Trump Washington Hotel, and all sorts of money is flowing to Donald Trump because he goes to his own properties, and law enforcement, Secret Service, et cetera, and cabinet officials have to go there. This is absolutely improper, and a Congress that was not being bullied by Trump and his far right-wing supporters like Robert Mercer would be stopping this and saying you cannot do this.
Well, concerns about Donald Trump's fitness for the office are also very much a part of the public discourse now. In your many years of covering Donald Trump, are you seeing changes in his conduct that would lead you to be even more concerned about his ability to lead?
Yeah, I think Donald has clear cognitive deficits compared to when I first met him back and started covering him back in 1988. He speaks in what has been characterized correctly as word salad. While he claims to be, smarter than anybody else, his language tells you that he speaks in short, broken phrases. He doesn't use any sophisticated words. He doesn't know the names of people he's talking about. The other day he referenced the F-52 fighter. There is no F-52 fighter unless you play a particular computer game. He's made so many wildly inaccurate statements, including statements against his own policies or his own stated policies, that it's clear that not only is Donald not very smart and very appallingly ignorant, but his brain function is just not what it used to be. Now, as we get older, I'm just a little younger than Donald. I'm 69, he's 71. I'm not as sharp as I was in my 40s and 50s, and I'm aware of that, but I can speak in long, coherent sentences and write books. Donald can't even properly regurgitate what's fed to him.
Mm-hmm. And that becomes clearer and clearer to us with each new day, it seems, and yet there's constant defense of his actions, of his tweeting. At some point, something's going to give, I would think. I mean, do you get that sense? I mean, at what point do the people in his own party turn and say, "Look, we've got to do something about this"?
So far, we haven't seen. The only indications we've seen of that have come from John McCain a little bit, and then from Jeff Flake and Bob Corker, neither of whom can run for election again because the Trump bullying crowd will make sure that in the primary, the Republican primary, they lose. I mean, Jeff Flake's the biggest family, best-known leading family of Arizona, and he can't run again because he stood up to Trump. We've seen most recently the absolute moral cowardice of Tom Cotton, a former U.S. military officer who holds himself out as a paragon of integrity and courage. And what did he say about Trump's vile comments about Africa, comparing him to outhouses? I don't recall. That is an act of moral cowardice. And unfortunately, what we're seeing among Republicans in Congress are acts of moral cowardice. And voters presumably are going to deal with this, but we don't know. I mean, to be frank, the Democrats have not done a good job of sticking to their knitting, and that's why the minority party is in control, because they've sought to suppress the vote. They have gerrymandered districts. They have set up rules to throw out votes whenever they can, especially in Michigan. And are we going to see a resurgence here and a turnover? It's not at all clear, but if we don't, Donald Trump will just keep damaging our country.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what people are looking for is can what happened in Virginia, towards the end of 2017, can that be repeated in 2018 nationwide? And I guess we'll just have to wait
Alabama.
and see. Right,
or
Alabama. And Alabama as well. Right, very good. David Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who has, of course, been covering Donald Trump for almost 3 decades. His latest book, It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America. Joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. David, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate you being with us, and we look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Democratic strategist and former Clinton campaign spokeswoman Karen Finney about how progressive Democrats can turn grassroots energy into electoral victory.
Here joining us in studio, Karen Finney, Democratic strategist and former senior spokesperson for the Clinton for President campaign, where we saw her daily multiple times on all the cable channels. It's just sort of a slower pace this year, isn't it, Karen?
Oh, I don't know about that. Maybe a little bit, but I think it's going to heat up quite a bit if the first few days are any indication.
This is a big year, 2018, for many reasons. Are you feeling optimistic about 2018?
I am feeling optimistic. I'm feeling optimistic for a number of reasons. Number one, we've got so many great candidates all the way up and down the ballot. I mean, you've got people running in local races and their state legislative races, in addition to Senate and House and governorships. People are raising their hands and getting out there. So I feel encouraged that we've got so many great candidates and new faces. A lot of, different people saying, okay, this is the first time I've ever run for anything. And secondly, because I think for, there's such a great enthusiasm and energy. And I think what we've seen, I talk about this as going from moment to movement. We saw so much energy in the aftermath of 2016 from the women's march to, again, wonderful victories in Alabama and Virginia and New Jersey. But throughout the year, we saw a lot of activity and a lot of wonderful organizations coming together. And so I think as we go from this moment to really creating a movement, a sustainable movement, and I liken it to, after talking to my parents have helped me really think about this, in the civil rights movement, where, there were lots of important things, there were moments that happened, but how do you coalesce that into a movement for change? And I believe that's what we're seeing. And that's, part of what I'm here to talk to you about is what the Women's National Democratic Club is doing on January 23rd, is bringing groups together and bringing candidates together to talk about how do we make sure we have a message, but also how do we make sure we're organized. I think part of what we're seeing here is really trying to scale up what what was done in Alabama and Virginia, and say, okay, as groups, how do we come together with the DNC, with the candidates, and make sure that we are doing the work we need to do to win?
Well, first of all, there's so much talk, which annoys the hell out of me, about who's best for 2020. And and I keep saying, no, 2018 is what we ought to be focused on. Absolutely. Why is 2018 so important?
2018 is critical for a number of reasons. Obviously, I mean, if you live in a state, who the governor is matters. We saw that just think about Obamacare, right? If your governor decided not to take the Medicaid money, you are in trouble. And so if you have a governor who says that was important, that's just one example of why that role is so important. The state legislatures, as we know, we've got redistricting coming up. And so state legislative races, it's something we as Democrats did not pay close enough attention to, quite frankly, going into 2010 redistricting. And look what happened. So redistricting, we know, is critical, and those state legislative races are critical. And frankly, state legislative races are critical in part because a lot of the damage that can be done happens at the state level. So who controls the legislature and who the governor is really matters. But then also when we're talking about the House and the Senate, really critical if we're going to have an opportunity to put a check on Donald Trump, which Lord knows we need it.
Yeah, right.
So, and that's, that can't be our only message. We've got to offer something positive and talk about what we would do differently. But so I think the opportunity is important in 2018. And the other thing I would say, Bill, that I think is so important is it is an important way for us to really organize. I would love to see us organize in 2018 and stay organized going into 2020 so that we are a strong progressive movement. I want to see that energy continue throughout, 2019, frankly, because that's what we need to do. My former boss, Howard Dean, when I worked at the DNC, the 50-state strategy.
Absolutely.
Right? He used to say, we got to run a permanent campaign, and we got to be there on the ground all the time talking to people.
Right. So as Democrats come into 2018, as you say, Trump's a disaster. We know that. But pointing that out is not enough.
That's right. That's right.
So what is the counter-democratic message as you see it? And it's still, still shaping.
Sure.
But
well, I think there's two pieces, right? Number one, I think, we need to hold every Republican elected official accountable for Donald Trump. This is now Donald Trump's Republican Party. So I think that is perfectly fair. And we saw, think about the members we saw. I mean, it shouldn't be hard to say that calling countries an S-hole is out of bounds. And for some Republicans, they stepped up and said that. Some...
Well, not many.
Not many. And plenty were like, I didn't hear that. Well, gee, I'm not sure. No more of that. On the positive frame...
But by the way, just on that, to reinforce that point, because there are too many people who isolate Donald Trump and say it's not the Republican Party. Peter makes this point a lot. It's not the Republican Party. It's Donald Trump. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's all the Republicans are together on this. I mean, they all...
That's right.
Vote for Donald Trump stuff. Support Donald Trump. Look at them now, falling on their sword for Donald Trump over this S-hole comment. Every single Republican, I believe, up and down the ballot.
Yep, absolutely.
Where do you stand for Donald Trump?
That's right. That's right. And I'll give you an example.
Hold them accountable.
I'll give you an example, Bill. I mean, this to me is a return of the Republican culture of corruption on steroids. I mean, the Republicans in Congress are protecting him on this Russia investigation. They're actually making it harder to get to the truth in some instances. Now, if that doesn't make you accountable, I don't know what does, right? So on the positive, though, I think we need to be talking about, and part of what we're going to do at this summit is, again, I think it's really important we're listening to candidates and listening to people at the grassroots in terms of what their concerns are, what they want to hear about. I certainly think that part of what we need to be talking about is inclusion and how our country is, if you think about DACA and immigration and our economy, I mean, this isn't just a nice to do. There's actually an economic imperative for inclusion that we need everybody to be part of the workforce. This is a country that welcomes immigrants. This is a country that is made of immigrants. So I think inclusion is really important. I think jobs, and not just jobs, but better jobs. Because I think one of the things that we're seeing, as you know, is we need to increase the quality of jobs that people have. I think we're about freedom, quite frankly. And by that I say, you're not free when you are, beholden to the insurance companies, or you are beholden to, a job that's not paying you what you need to a living wage to actually take care of your family. And frankly, I think freedom also means we should care that the Russians and other, actors may be trying to influence our election. So I think we're about jobs, we're about freedom, and I think we're about opportunity, quite frankly. Now, that's just my opinion. That's not the official message.
I'll buy it. That's good.
But I think that's what, but I think, if I could just say one other thing, I think also in this Me Too movement, we've got to understand that we're not just talking, there's an economic element to that too. And it's why equal pay matters. It's why, that lifts families. That's about opportunity. That's about, economic freedom, right? And the ability to take care of yourself and your family. So that, to me, are some of the themes I hope we'll talk about. But that's what we're going to be talking about on the 23rd.
Well, I was going to say, okay, now on the 23rd, you referenced that a couple of times. Yep. What is happening on the 23rd? Who's there? Where? And, And
So on the 23rd, I want people to go to the website democraticwomen.org/events if you want to attend. And I'm going to tell you the event right now is...
Peter, we'll put that up on our website,
democraticwomen.org/events.
Okay.
For sure.
And the event is basically, it's at the National Women's Democratic Club here in Washington, D.C. And they're bringing together for the first time, we've got folks from the DNC coming, we've got candidates coming, they've got grassroots groups, some of the very folks that we saw out there working so hard in Alabama and Virginia and New Jersey, all coming together essentially to talk about, our messaging And part of what I'm going to be talking about is how do you create a message and then talk about that message? What's important about a message? And obviously, to my mind, what that means is, we've got to be talking about the issues and the things that people care most about. And I think we've got to be talking about it from our values. Governor Dean used to always say it's a sign of respect to show up and ask people for their vote. And part of doing that is listening to people. And so part of what this summit is going to be about is listening to each other and how do we distill that into a few simple ideas, knowing that how you win in, Texas may not be the same way you win in Florida, but we still have core values as a progressive movement that we need to be talking about.
And so this comes just about on the 1-year anniversary of the Women's March in Washington, right?
It does. And I know that, and unfortunately, about a year since, the Orange Menace became official.
Yeah.
And so it's a way, I think what's really important and what the Women's National Democratic Club is really trying to do with this effort is galvanize this energy and make sure that we are organized to keep it going. Make sure that we are leveraging all of our assets in terms of, different groups are good at different parts of the puzzle. So let's make sure we pull those puzzle pieces together to have a really great strategy.
Is there another march planned?
I believe this year there is a march.
I've heard about some around the country. I don't know if there's one big one in Washington, but
I think people are going local this time. And look, I think what's important is I'm glad to see, I believe, a lot of the same women that you probably saw out marching are now running for office.
Oh, yeah.
Which is great because we need women's leadership. I can tell you that.
I've mentioned this before. I think Emily's List, which does such a great job of training particularly women candidates, school
pro-choice,
board, city council, pro-choice, Democratic women. They've got 15,000, I think, signed up this year running for everything from Senate to city council, school board.
That's right. And that's how it should be. It should be, regular people stepping up and running for office. And I think the other thing that is so important is we've got to remember as a progressive movement, it's important to keep that pipeline. Keep that pipeline, whether you may start at city council or the school board, you could end up being president. You could end up being senator or governor. I mean, that's what we want. We want people to come up through our pipeline and stay engaged.
Now, there was a very healthy primary in 2016. You were on one side, I was on the other side.
Yes.
But we were really on I believe, my friends don't agree, we were on the same side.
I agree with that.
Really. And I was an enthusiastic supporter of Hillary Clinton. I've always loved her. I just felt that we needed a good, healthy primary in 2016. But to a certain extent, that debate still goes on between where should the Democratic Party, I'm not talking about candidates now, but where should the Democratic Party, are we a progressive party?
Yep.
Or more a mainstream party, I guess. Or something. We're certainly everybody left of center, right?
Yeah.
But where, is that a legitimate debate? Is it an important debate? And where is it going now? What is your take?
Look, I think it's an important debate, but I think it's also important for us to remember that it certainly feels to me like that is a conversation that it's like in life, right? You're always thinking about who you are and what you believe and hopefully challenging what, your beliefs are challenged. That doesn't mean you don't have a core. And I think that's, to me, what I see our party going through, which is, and part of why the debate is so important is that's how we move forward. I mean, think about where we were on marriage equality. And, we are now in a very different place as a party and as a movement and as a country. So I think those conversations are healthy. And I agree with you. I mean, I think that contested primaries are a good thing because I think it can be very clarifying for people about where they stand. And I think in this case, I think the party is going through and as a movement, I think we're really challenging ourselves to say, and look, you and I've been around a while in this game, and there are a lot of issues that people say are liberal, like pay equity, which I don't see that as a liberal issue. I see that as a pretty mainstream economic issue, right?
Talking about values.
Exactly.
I mean, look at this latest flap with Michelle Williams and Mark, whatever his name is.
Mark Wahlberg.
Wahlberg. Yeah. I mean, good for him for giving his money away, but whoever made that decision to pay her $80 a day and pay him $1.5 million?
Well, but
Jesus.
But here's what's so important.
This is Hollywood.
It is.
Too.
I know. But here's what's
liberal Hollywood.
Here's what's important about that, and this goes back to those core values. we should value her work the same way we value his work.
Of course.
And her people should have made a better deal. Good for his people for making such a good deal for him.
They had the same agent.
Yeah. So shame on her agents for not fighting for her.
Yes.
And that's the core value right there, right? And shame on shame on everybody who made those decisions. I mean, it's great for Mark Wahlberg that he's given up the money, but it's not his fault that her people, same people, didn't make a good deal. That's what we have to stay focused on. That is a core value. And that's the kind of conversation I think we have to be talking about. Look, to my mind, though, there are certain things, I believe I'm a pro-choice woman. I'm on the board of NARAL. So to me, that is a core value. The idea that women should be able to make their own decisions about their bodies. I think that is critical. I mean, there are certain core issues where I think that seem to be core to the Democratic Party. Some folks may think it's okay on the margins. Sure. I mean, I think we can always have a conversation and try to talk with people about these issues and try to, move the ball forward. I think that's a good thing.
You mentioned the DNC, and we've come to know Tom Perez really well. He's in frequently. He certainly is a believer in the Howard Dean strategy of we have to be and have candidates in every district, in every seat, red districts as well as blue districts. Every zip code counts.
That's right.
Do you see the energy today with the DNC or with the grassroots organizations?
So I think that I see more of it in the grassroots on the outside. But having been at the DNC in 2000 from 2005 to 2009 with Howard Dean, that doesn't surprise me. Although I would say I think what we're seeing in the grassroots right now is unlike anything we've seen in a very long time. I think what the DNC is also wise, though, is trying to figure out how do we partner with outside organizations. If that's where the energy is, don't try to control it. Don't try to fight it. Great. If people are engaged, that's what matters. And so how do we partner? And so I'm pleased to see that. I think for Tom, I mean, he came in with a tough situation in that there was debt from the campaign. So I think he's trying to really rebuild that up. And certainly what I hope happens is that through 2018, he is able to, rebuild our parties in the states so that going into 2020, we've got both. We've got the really strong grassroots outside the party, but then a really strong infrastructure inside the party, because there are things that the party does at the state level that really matters. And look, again, we've got to be able to have, as we said at the beginning, we've got to be able to have this conversation with people every day, everywhere, about who we are and what we stand for. Because if we're not there, they only hear the other side.
Right.
So we've got to make sure that we're there.
But on the grassroots organizations, I mean, I must say, there's so many of them, and every time I mention them, I'm afraid that I forget somebody. But if you look at, I mentioned Emily's list, MoveOn.org, Our Revolution, Indivisible, Run for Something, I think is the name of that.
Color of Change. Woke Vote, Black Pact.
There you go.
I know.
Right. And they are all, I think, doing incredible.
Just to get I'm just trying to think. They're all popping into my head. Civic engagement
more
fund.
than I do. Yeah, but
I've been trying to stay on top of what's going on because
and it's exciting. I've never seen this kind of energy. They're out there. They're recruiting candidates. They're training candidates. They're raising money. Small contributions.
Yep.
They're in races and they're winning seats for state assembly, flipping state legislative seats.
That's right.
Mayor's races, the mayor of Birmingham, Alabama, the new mayor down there. I mean, it's exciting what's going on.
It's very
picking
exciting.
up seats in Oklahoma,
And you know what I hope we learn from that, though, Bill?
And that's not, again, a Washington directed or dominated campaign.
Yep.
It's really coming from the grassroots up, which is so exciting.
It is very exciting, and I hope that we learn from this and from 2017. We have to stop saying, well, we can't win there. We can win everywhere. We can win anywhere. If we have, good candidates and we work hard, we can win anywhere. I mean, people were winning, some of the down ballot races, as you know, in 2017. Excuse me, we ran in places that were gerrymandered and not in our favor because people turned out. So
look at Virginia, right?
That's right.
We had a candidate in every single seat for the House of Delegates.
That's right.
And except for a fluke, we're down by one. But
that's right.
Yeah, who says one vote doesn't count, right? Every vote doesn't count.
Hey, if that's not the message from 2016 and 2017, like every vote counts and your vote matters, I hope people are, really heeding that message. And look, the most important thing about what's happening at the grassroots is also that it's saying to people, you matter and you can be involved in the way that is relevant to you, that is authentic to what you want to do. If you want to register voters, or you want to focus on women, or you want to focus on the Latino community or the African American community, or you want to focus on this mayor's race, or you want to work on a governor's race. The point is that it is empowering people on a daily basis to be involved in a way that is most authentic to their lives, and that is critical.
And people who are watching or listening who have not yet plugged in, but kind of feel the urge to, what do they do? How do they connect?
Well, they can do a couple things. Number one, you can sign up to come to the event on the 23rd at the Women's National Democratic Club.
Which is, again, to
democraticwomen.org/events. /events, yes. Okay. And you can come to the event on the 23rd. You can also Google the Women's National Democratic Club and find out more. But also then find out what's going on in your area if you want. Indivisible has local chapters. You can go to, check out what Color of Change is up to. Check out what Voto Latino is up to. See if there's, what you can also do? Open your paper and see what are the local races. Do you like any of the candidates who are running? I worked with students in the fall semester, and I kept saying, look, if there's a candidate that you like, just go volunteer, because it's great experience. And if it's someone that, working for someone that you like and you believe in is a great experience, and you will have helped to make that happen. So, plug into one of the organizations. You can also go to Democrats.org and find out what the party is doing. I think that's important. As someone who worked in the Democratic Party, I think part of how we change is from the inside. We got to be at the table to help bring change. And like I say, see what's going on in your community that you want to get involved in. The other thing, too, that I think the last thing I'll say, Bill, is it may not be a candidate. It may be an issue like DACA or immigration reform or climate change. There's a lot going on that is also issue-based. So it could be, abortion rights. Come to NARAL and see what we're up to. Planned Parenthood. There's a lot of wonderful organizations doing a lot of great work. And it's wonderful to have this reinvigoration by the grassroots.
So you've been at this for a long time.
A while. In kindergarten. Kidding.
And you're damn good at it.
Well,
and so now we're talking about young people, and we're talking about people with energy and people who really care and have a core sense of values, and encouraging them to even step up and make the plunge and run for office.
Yeah.
Why not you?
Well, first of all,
why haven't you ever run for office, or have you?
I've never run for office.
Well, why not now? Why aren't you out there?
Well,
what district do you live in?
I live in the District of Columbia.
All right, well, move.
We've got a great mayor.
Move. Mayor, fine. I was just thinking of Congress, right?
I know. I'm just saying, in D.C., right? We're limited
in D.C., right?
In what we can do. Have
you thought about it? And you as an example, why haven't you made the plunge?
Because I'm not crazy. Just kidding. I'm kidding. I know that's the wrong message. That's the wrong message.
You like a private life. That is the wrong message.
Look, because I guess for me personally, I like helping get people elected. I like helping people on that journey. And I really enjoy helping to bring about change through other processes. My dad was a civil rights lawyer. My mom's a social worker. Both my father's passed. My mom's retired. And so, for me, the fight is I have found other ways to fight for the issues that I care about. I'll never say never.
Which, by the way, is totally legitimate.
Yeah.
Not everybody can be the candidate.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah,
exactly.
It takes a village.
It does take a village. And I also think, Bill, and this is part of why what you're doing is so important. And you know this, it's also important for us to have voices outside of the process that help push the process along and help push the issues along. And that's kind of where I felt like I can contribute best, is to try to point things out. I mean, you were talking earlier about, the president's, the S-hole comments. And like we said, what we know, he's an ass. I hope I can say that on your show.
Yes.
We know that. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Right. And I think being a part of, helping us stay focused on what really matters and helping good people get elected, that's where I see my role.
All right. No.
How about you?
That's a very look. I'm doing my thing, but I was a candidate at one time too, and
that's true.
The voters decided they wanted somebody else. So that's fine. So I just jumped back into the media. Right. So they made a mistake, but
we'll still. Take
we're
you, Bill.
lucky to have you on the airwaves, Bill. That's the most important thing.
Karen Finney, thanks so much for what you're doing, and thanks for coming in today. And give them hell on January 23rd.
Will indeed. We will.
All right. Great.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Matt Rozsa, David Cay Johnston, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.